The grand dining room of the luxurious five-star restaurant sparkled under crystal chandeliers, filled with laughter, polished silverware, and the soft notes of a live piano playing in the corner. Elegant men in tailored suits and women in shimmering gowns carried themselves with ease, every movement carefully measured to display wealth and refinement. But in the midst of this glittering display of sophistication, one woman sat quietly at a corner table, her presence commanding attention even in her silence. She was dressed in a simple, dark kimono-style dress that spoke more of dignity than of fashion. Silver hair, neatly pinned, framed a face lined not just by age but by years of experience and wisdom. Her hands trembled slightly as they rested on the tablecloth, clutching a small pendant at her chest. She was a millionaire, everyone in the room knew it. Whispers had already spread among the guests the moment she entered. "That's the Japanese businesswoman who built an empire in Tokyo," some murmured. "She's here in New York on investment matters," others speculated. Yet despite the awe her presence evoked, there was something strikingly different about her tonight. She wasn't surrounded by assistants or translators. She had come alone, and when the waiter brought her the menu, her eyes moved over the English words with growing confusion. She opened her mouth, tried to form a sentence, but her voice faltered. She could only manage a few broken phrases in heavily accented English that no one around her seemed to understand. The room's atmosphere shifted. Some guests tried to hide their smirks, others simply shook their heads. Even the staff at the restaurant struggled, exchanging awkward glances as they failed to comprehend her requests. What had started as admiration soon turned into an uncomfortable spectacle. She, a woman of immense wealth and power, was suddenly vulnerable, trapped in a world where her voice could not reach anyone. And in her eyes, beneath the veil of composure, there was a glimmer of loneliness that no amount of riches could erase. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the small acts of humanity that can change someone's world, please take a moment to like this video, share it, and subscribe to American Folk Tales. Your support helps us bring more powerful true-to-life stories that touch the heart. As the evening continued, tension at her table grew. The servers tried their best, pointing at items on the menu, speaking louder as though volume could overcome the barrier, but it only left the woman more distressed. She shook her head gently, her hands trembling more visibly now, until finally she lowered her gaze, clutching the pendant tighter, as though silently wishing for someone, anyone, to understand her. At that moment, in the background, a young waitress stood observing. She was not part of the elite staff usually assigned to VIP guests. She was one of the newer hires, often tasked with clearing glasses, bringing water, and handling the tables nobody else wanted. Her uniform was plain, her ponytail slightly messy from the rush of the evening, and her name tag read simply, Emily. For most of the night, she had moved quietly, hoping not to attract the scrutiny of her stricter supervisors. But as she watched the woman struggle, something inside her stirred, a memory of her own grandmother who used to sit at the kitchen table, speaking only Japanese, while Emily as a little girl would try to understand. Emily had grown up with a Japanese grandmother who never quite mastered English, even after decades of living in America. Many nights, she remembered sitting by her side, practicing the language her classmates never understood, translating her grandmother's words when others grew impatient. She had always thought of it as a quiet part of her identity, a skill she carried almost in secret, rarely finding a chance to use. But now, standing in this opulent restaurant, watching the dignified woman shrink under the weight of incomprehension, Emily realized she might be the only one who could reach her. She hesitated for a moment, glancing at her manager who was already whispering with another waiter in frustration. It wasn't her table. She wasn't supposed to intervene. But her heart pressed her forward. Gathering courage, she walked towards the woman's table. The other diners looked on, curious, as this young waitress, clearly out of her depth among the suited waiters and white tablecloths, approached the table and gently bent down. She looked into the woman's eyes with warmth and softly spoke in Japanese. The transformation was instant. The older woman's eyes widened, shimmering with disbelief. For a second, she seemed frozen, and then, as Emily repeated herself, the woman's lips parted, and tears welled up. Relief washed over her face like sunlight breaking through clouds. For the first time all evening, she smiled. Words poured from her, fluent and graceful, and Emily responded with ease, bridging a gap that moments before had felt impossible. The room fell into stunned silence. Diners who had moments earlier whispered and smirked now leaned forward in awe. The millionaire Japanese woman, once isolated and misunderstood, was suddenly laughing softly, her voice rich with gratitude as she spoke to Emily. The waitress listened patiently, translating her meal preferences to the chef, ensuring her comfort with gentle attention. The simple act of being understood had transformed the evening, restoring dignity to a woman who had been made to feel small despite her wealth. As the night went on, Emily stayed by her side whenever needed, helping her through the meal, making sure she felt cared for. The other guests couldn't take their eyes off the scene, the powerful lesson unfolding before them. In a world obsessed with status, wealth, and appearances, it was not the expensive suits or polished accents that brought comfort, but the quiet compassion of a young waitress who remembered the language of her grandmother. The millionaire woman was no stranger to being admired for her fortune. People bowed to her success, praised her empire, and courted her investments. But tonight was different. Tonight, she was reminded of something far more precious, the simple gift of human connection. She reached for Emily's hand before leaving, holding it with a strength that belied her age. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she whispered words that only Emily understood, words of gratitude that transcended language. When the woman finally left, escorted by her driver, the restaurant buzzed with hushed conversations. Some guests were humbled, others inspired. Even Emily's strict manager, who had frowned at her earlier, seemed to soften, realizing that what she had done was more valuable than any perfectly folded napkin or polished glass. But the story didn't end at that dinner table. A few weeks later, Emily received a letter at the restaurant. Inside was a handwritten note in Japanese, along with an invitation. The millionaire woman had requested her presence at a cultural foundation event in the city. She wanted Emily to be there, not as a server, but as an honored guest. And attached to the invitation was a scholarship offer. The woman had learned that Emily was studying languages at community college and struggling to afford tuition. The letter explained that she wanted to sponsor Emily's education, to support the voice that had once reached out to her when no one else did. Emily cried when she read the letter. She hadn't thought her small act of kindness would ever matter beyond that night, but it had changed her life. The millionaire woman had given her more than financial help. She had given her belief, validation that her heart and her heritage were gifts worth honoring. Years later, Emily would stand on stages as a professional translator, traveling across countries, bridging cultures and languages, always remembering the night it began. She often recalled the tears in the Japanese woman's eyes, the silence that fell over a room full of wealthy strangers, and the powerful truth that unfolded: dignity and kindness are more valuable than riches, and sometimes, the smallest voice can carry the greatest impact. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to American Folk Tales. Your engagement helps us continue creating stories that remind the world of the power of empathy, kindness, and human connection. And before we end, please comment below: have you ever experienced a moment where someone's kindness broke through a barrier in your life? We'd love to hear your stories. Because in the end, what people remember most is not how much we own, but how much love we share.